There we go. Well, thank you very much. I've been very excited to be here, and I've been looking forward to listening more than talking because there's so many smart people in this place. So my talk will probably be shorter than the others, I'm guessing. But I was asked to, after Rob's wonderful chapeau presentation, to kind of take it down to the project or program level a little bit and look specifically at youth violence prevention. So what I want to present is kind of how the World Bank's view of this issue has been evolving and how our approach is evolving, and I'll give 3 examples of projects that we have, 2 that have closed and 1 that is currently open, with the view to helping to answer a piece of the question anyway of how we can cut this violence in half in the next 30 years. So now some of this was put forward this morning, so I don't think I have to really repeat it all. Why should we, and this plus you're an audience you already drank this Kool-Aid, right? You know why it's important to focus on youth violence. We know youth are a majority of the population in many countries, at least half the population in most countries, and most homicides are concentrated among youth. The male homicide rate is twice the female homicide rate globally, and in some countries it's a lot higher than that. And it's not just the homicides that concern us. For every death of a young person, there's between 20 and 40 more that are injured, and those injuries carry with them serious long-term impacts on health and mental health, and not just among the individual, but among families and communities as well. So this ought to be a priority. Youth violence prevention is increasingly a higher and higher priority for many governments. The WHO global report that Alex Bouchard mentioned this morning that's coming out, I had a sneak peek at that. And most of the 134 countries that are covered in that report have youth violence prevention as a top priority. This is something that countries are very concerned about, and from the World Bank, we are increasing our investment in these kinds of programs. We are putting more investment in what we call fragile and conflict-affected settings, where violence is concentrated globally. And so this is going to be, I hope, an increasing part of our portfolio as well. It's supposed to be, so that's why I'm there. So looking at what's dangerous about youth, why are youth at risk? Everybody has seen this diagram a million times, so I'll just highlight a few things there. But youth in particular, adolescence, is a critical time because the cognitive and emotional capacities are still developing in the young person, and anyone who has spent time with a 15-year-old lately would know that, right? There's the frontal cortex is not there yet, so you're not able, not just that they don't want to think about the future, they're really not able to, even when they've had a solid, loving relationship with caregivers and all the protective factors that we care about, right? So when youth are under stress, this is the other big risk factor, when you're exposed to violence and extreme adversity that comes with poverty and exclusion, then that's even more intense, and the risk is even higher. There's also I think it's important to look particularly at the combination between the structural level, the societal level of risk factors, and how those combine with the other levels of factors to produce the tendency for violent behavior. And I focus a little bit more on the structural level because that's where development institutions, that's where we are active. That's mostly where our interventions are. Okay. So to reduce youth violence by 50% in 30 years, we're going to need to work at more than one level at a time. And why do we need to do that? Why is it important to work at multiple levels? I mean, we're seeing more and more with the evidence that's coming out that there have been some great targeted interventions that have reduced youth violent behavior, but when the structural conditions don't change, those impacts dissipate very quickly. There's a set of impact evaluations that just came out that were done in Chicago around different curricula, all focused on cognitive behavioral therapy, and they showed between a 20 and 40% drop in aggressive behavior among the youth that were part of the program, and all the impacts were gone in a year. Because youth have to go back to the streets, they have to go back to the families where they were living, and future orientation is not a good survival skill when that's your environment, right? So we have to think about the structural level. The second is that those contextual factors, the physical environment, the macroeconomic conditions like unemployment that Rob was mentioning, and precariousness of the labor market, those can be just as stressful and just as impactful physiologically and in terms of mental health and behavior as exposure to violence, as incidences of violence, for example. Some of the new research that we're getting on psychosocial well-being shows that poverty, and if you live in a war zone, the experience of being exposed to violence might be traumatic to a certain degree, but the experience of trying to make it every day in that war zone and feed your family and sleep at night and protect your children is at least as stressful and at least as impactful on your behavior and your mental health. So we need to pay attention to those contextual factors. So we've been evolving our approach, I'm happy to say. I mean, in the maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the focus was on temporary employment, mostly public works kind of jobs. It was demobilization projects with ex-combatants, so you put them to work because the underlying theory of change was these guys don't have anything to do, all they know how to do is fight, we need to get them busy and have them use their energy on something, so let's give them these jobs. And the jobs were usually sweating all day in the hot sun for less than minimum wage, picking up trash. It wasn't anything that gives you a sense of belonging or a career path or allows you to advance socially and economically. You're certainly not going to be able to get married working in a job like that. And the jobs were only 2-3 months long, and then there was nothing after that. So we're sort of moving away from those and looking more at training, specialized training that's more aligned with what the labor market needs. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, it's now recognized that the formal wage sector is just not going to create the number of jobs that would be needed to absorb the growing youth population. It's not. And we need to stop pretending that it's going to be. So now the message is we need to focus much more on informal markets, on household enterprises, on small businesses, and on the existing sources of livelihoods that people already have. And how can we strengthen those and make them more productive, for example? Because we want, we want this to actually work out for the youth so that they have something beyond the temporary employment. The second shift is more of a focus on life skills. I mean, in the beginning, an employment program was just that, go to work and then we'll pay you at the end of the day. Now there's much more focus on, there's actually more, there's a lot that you need to know to be able to behave in a certain way in a job, and the survival skills that many youth have developed to be involved in a war or to function in their home environments are not appropriate for the job, for an employment situation, right? You can't lose your temper with your boss and just quit like that. You have to learn certain life skills. So more and more we're focusing on those, and more on the non-cognitive piece of it. So trying to help youth develop skills for impulse control, emotional regulation, all those kinds of non-cognitive, what we call soft skills. But they actually turn out to be, in many studies, more important than the hard skills. And most employers, when we survey them, would say, I don't care so much whether this person can read and write. I want to know if this person can show up to work every day and be there all day and listen to me and learn on the job, right? So that's one thing we've changed. The other is really looking at the built environments as catalysts for prevention. We did some work, actually Rob worked on it with us a few years ago, called Violence in the City, and it was a study of 5 neighborhoods actually, in cities that had high violence rates. And some of the main findings of that were that when violence had become entrenched and very much embedded in social life, there was no way for people to actually come together and collectively act in order to counteract that violence. So they didn't have a safe place to meet. They didn't have safe passage to get to and from the place where they wanted to meet. There was no way that police could even go in to patrol. The streets were too narrow and the housing was too chaotically organized so that you didn't have any way for service providers to go in there. So we've been focusing much more not just on improving the built environment, but on improving the built environment with a view to making it easier for the state to have a presence in the neighborhoods and making it easier for people to come together collectively. So looking at some examples of this, the first one is in Papua New Guinea. This is a project that I've been working on for the last couple of years. And this is kind of your garden variety, it started anyway as the garden variety youth employment project. It's got a public works component, depending on how the youth score on basic literacy and numeracy skills. They either go into public works, which is picking up trash and cleaning up public spaces, or if they have higher literacy, they can go into an internship. And it originally included a life skills component as well, but we found very quickly in the first 6 months that youth were dropping out of the project really quickly. We were losing them. And when we looked at why, it was because we really hadn't taken into account sufficiently the social context there, which if any of you have worked in Papua New Guinea, you know that it's a very collectivist society. The Wantok system is all based on kinship, and that defines who you marry, where you can work, what profession you will have. It's all based on your clan. And so asking youth to come as individuals, which is what we originally had it set up as, and take a test by themselves and then go out on a work site by themselves with a bunch of people from other clans was not something they were used to. It was ripping them away from their social context, and they didn't last. And so we redesigned it so that after they passed the basic eligibility requirements, they would organize themselves in groups, and then they would go and work in groups, and it's doing a lot better. So building on the existing social cohesion. The other thing that we learned quickly is that it was important to prioritize public works projects that were going to be visible in the community and that would improve the community's image of youth. So, you don't want to have youth just picking up trash in an area that is going to be full of trash the day after they leave again. You want to make sure it's a park in the middle of the community so that the elders will see them doing something useful, because part of it is about really rebuilding those or improving those intergenerational relationships. So the project's only about halfway through now, but already they'd seen at the midterm review a 10% drop in criminal behavior, fewer people saying that they engaged in crime, and also a community survey that said that youth in this program were much less likely to be involved in crime. So the community perceptions had also improved. Then the second project I wanted to highlight was the Inner Cities project in Jamaica, which was more of our, I'd say, typical urban/social violence prevention project. It's combining improvements in urban infrastructure with social prevention policies. And it came at an opportune moment. We were really taking advantage of a shift in policy where we had a new Minister of Finance who was very much interested in moving away from the heavy policing, kind of heavy-handed tactics towards more prevention and more engagement with communities. We had that leadership at the highest levels. And the idea was to try and bring the state presence in by improving the infrastructure in the community and bringing in service providers. And then, after that, have some very targeted sub-projects with youth, with domestic violence, with different sub-populations there. And it was an interesting ride there, really, because in the very beginning, the service providers couldn't get in at all. The police couldn't get in at all. And so some of the first things they had to do were, I remember one thing was the houses had zinc fences around them, which is a really common thing. And then the fences were really high. And zinc it doesn't absorb a bullet, to put it bluntly. When there are guns being shot, the bullets ricochet off and it's more dangerous. And then also because the fence was so high, people couldn't see out. They couldn't see the street. So one of the first things that was done was getting rid of those zinc fences and replacing them with concrete blocks, sort of barriers that still provided people still wanted something around their house, but you could see over those a little better, and that allowed that natural vigilance for people to keep an eye on each other. And similar things like that and then the social interventions were more about dialogue with youth, teaching conflict resolution skills, even negotiating truces between certain rival gangs. And so by the end of the project, we saw a 30% increase in those who said they felt safe in the community, up to 91% from when it started, and an 18% increase in those that said they wanted to stay in the neighborhood. And the last project I wanted to highlight is in Honduras, which you will know is the murder capital of the world, except I think Syria might have more these days. But in terms of interpersonal violence, Honduras is definitely it. This was a really challenging environment for us to go in. They have as a national priority violence prevention, but they are overwhelmed, to say the least. They really have their hands full. So like other Central American countries in the last few years, Honduras created a prevention cabinet, and they put a vice ministry under the Minister of Security for prevention alone. And so they had and designed a national policy. So there's a certain policy commitment and an understanding that it's not just about more cops and arresting youth and putting them in jail, which is what they were doing before, even though that policing is definitely part of the solution, of course. But a move much more towards preventative approaches. And this project what I think is interesting to highlight about it is that it tries to connect those national policy changes with what's happening on the municipal level. So it's focused on 3 of the highest crime municipalities, and in those municipalities, the communities produce their own safety plans based on what they think is important, and they come up with their priorities. And the Ministry of Prevention, Vice Ministry of Prevention, certifies those. So there's a process through which those are aligned with national policy, and national policymakers learn from what's happening on the ground. Ideally, I won't say it's definitely fraught with problems, as you would expect in Honduras, but we're getting there. And then some of the projects focus on youth prevention. So there's this real, I think the promising part of this, it's new, so I don't have any concrete results yet, except for that we have the citizen security plans in place for about 10 of the cities within those 3 areas, and 10 sub-projects have been launched. But the promising piece of it is really strengthening that national coordination and aligning it with what's going on the municipal level. So just to finish up, and coming back to the original question of how can we have violence in the next 30 years, I think the first thing is to really make sure that we are coordinating our work at multiple levels, make sure we're at the national level and at the local level simultaneously, and that those efforts are aligned. Second, to make sure that we're building on the existing sources of cohesion that people already rely on. And also using infrastructure improvements to catalyze action, at least as a development actor. That's where our expertise comes in. That's where we can help. And then finally, making sure that the projects that we have also have a view to increasing the trust and increasing the value that people place on youth, or the perception that people have of youth in the community. That's all.
Thank you very much.